Welcome to the Grimoire of Resistance podcast. This is episode 13, Burn Fascism, Not Witches. Here is your host, Angela Wilson.
Welcome, friends and familiars, to the 13th episode of the Grimoire of Resistance. Today, we are reflecting on the rise of neo-fascism in North America. In my description of our discussion, I reference the quote, which is essentially, "History doesn't repeat, it rhymes." In the last episode, I discussed the multiple crises in Europe following the First World War, a likely result of the fall of the Ottoman Empire, that were most obvious in both Italy and Germany, and the development of the fascist regime in Italy and the rise of the Nazis in Germany. Essentially, this was blamed on Italy's high unemployment, inflation, and increased worker revolts. That does seem a bit similar. Despite the promising post-COVID numbers, the US started to see its unemployment numbers creep up last year. But it is more likely the inflation, or should we more accurately say, greedflation. Also, where have all the houses gone? To the corporations, everyone, well, maybe not all of them. In this episode, I want to discuss how we, as witches, can fight back against the neo-Nazism spreading out across the West. Remember how I said history likes to rhyme?
Okay, so I'm not letting the computer voice talk the whole way. This is really the presentation. I am going to briefly discuss some points from my candidacy proposal that focus on fascism and podcasts. Fascist movements of the 1920s and 30s used economic instability, nationalism, and gender oppression to consolidate power. I tend to define fascism the same way Gramsci did. It is a complex, passive revolution in response to a crisis of hegemony, right, which elevates either a leader or a coalition to power. He said it appeals to a barbaric and anti-social psychology. It's not the revolution of the proletariat, but it is appealing across classes. Today, far-right digital spaces, podcasts, and online communities are reproducing similar tactics. There are definite parallels with Gramsci's view on Italian fascism and modern neo-fascism. The modern movements do have their roots in European fascism and the hate movements of the KKK in North America. But in the case of neo-fascism today, I would place its start following the crisis of 2008. To understand also how we got here, I'm going to use three key texts that inform my work. In Caliban and the Witch, Silvia Federici uses both the symbolism of Sycorax, the witch in The Tempest, and actual witch hunts to describe the creation of the state and the rise of capitalism. Her main focus was primitive accumulation, which enclosed the commons and forced the worker to work the land for wages. As labor demands grew, the repression of women through the witch hunts and other means gave the state control of reproduction. This process led to power consolidation in what Marx calls the bourgeoisie. In Carolyn Merchant's 1980 overview of the scientific revolution, The Death of Nature, Women, Ecology, and the Scientific Revolution, she describes the separation of humanity from nature, colonization, and the subjugation of women. Through her examination of history, Merchant uses the scientific revolution to explain the way modernity has come about and creates the illnesses that plagues the system of modernity. Once regarded as a nurturing mother, nature has now been mechanized and is primarily viewed as a source for extraction. This shift is attributed to the scientific revolution. In this new context, women began to be perceived as chaotic, reflecting society's altered view on nature. Merchant argues that this mindset persists today and contributes to the ongoing environmental crises. The role of media in spreading fascism, from radio to podcasts. The 1930s Nazi Germany used radio to spread propaganda, just as today's far-right figures use podcasts and social media to radicalize followers. In Bias of Communication, Harold Innis discusses the differences between time-based and space-based media. A medium can be categorized in either of these terms. Time-based media are durable and focus on preserving information across generations, whereas space-based media are easily transportable and can reach a large audience quickly, often at the expense of long-term preservation. Innis emphasized that the control over media equates control over power. He argued that space-based communication leads to short-term thinking and instability. He critiques how modern mass media, often controlled by corporate interests, may undermine deep knowledge and democratic discourse. In the most prominent example of a pro-patriarchal and repressive podcast genre is the manosphere. Manosphere podcasts contribute to toxic masculinity, misogyny, and far-right radicalization. They reinforce patriarchal structures in the digital media space. In fact, some observers, including The Wire, think that the rise in Republican voting among young American men has a lot to do with the widespread influence of manosphere podcasts. This trend also benefited Pierre Poilievre up until recently. When he ran as Conservative Party leader, he tagged a lot of his YouTube videos with popular manosphere hashtags. It is crucial to understand that the manosphere represents a digital patriarchy, modern far-right spaces that employ harassment, doxing, and disinformation to silence feminist voices both online and offline. How do we use the feminist discourse to disrupt these fascist narratives? Women have always resisted fascist authoritarian movements in the past. For example, Sophie Scholl was integral in the White Rose movement, which is represented by this monument, a German anti-fascist movement. The women of the French Resistance, such as Lucie Aubrac and Marie-Madeleine Fourcade, were integral in fighting the Nazis during the occupation of France in World War II. So the history may rhyme, but perhaps the counter to neo-fascism should be entirely new. Feminism serves both as a framework for understanding how oppressive systems develop and a means to challenge the power used by neo-fascists. We need to utilize tools not only for resistance, as highlighted by the movements of 2017, and yes, that's me standing beside a dinosaur at the March for Science movement event here in Edmonton, but also embrace an anti-oppression approach. We must adopt a true anti-fascist, anti-patriarchal, and anti-neoliberal framework to create real change. So how would we reclaim both media and the political space? Well, we could support feminist, queer, and progressive podcasts to counter these narratives, engage in policy making, defend DEI initiatives, and participate in local government. I do like the idea of embracing your witch, despite Trump and what other far-right influencers label their persecution as witch hunts. We must reclaim the true nature of the witch hunt for activism. The witch represents intersectionality, anti-colonialism, and can also be performative and symbolic of womanhood, nature, queerness, disability, and other differences. As we've seen with the popularity of the movie Wicked, which is based on the anti-fascist novel Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West by Gregory Maguire. So let's just tune in to the end of the podcast.
And don't forget to mention the code GOR when you buy your potions from our sponsor, the Magic Box. Speaking of spells, we conclude our episode today with our Spells and Hexes segment. So let us get focused and pick our target. Here are our 5 tricks to help you with your anti-oppressive practices. Rather, these are Derek Clifford's 5 principles of anti-oppressive practices in relation to social work, as summarized by Burke and Harrison, 2002. Social difference, recognizing that the major and minor differences between people make the understanding and experience of oppression a complex matter. Linking personal and political. Personal biographies are placed within a wider social context, and the individual's life situation is viewed in relation to social systems. Power, understanding how power plays a role in both personal and structural levels. Historical and geographical location. Life experience depends on place and time and creates the cultural context for oppression. Reflexivity or mutual involvement. Reflexivity is the continual consideration of how values, social difference, and power affect the interactions between individuals. This is not only a matter of witchcraft, but also sociology, history, and ethics. With that, thank you, friends and familiars. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your coven. Blessed be